So, what really happens when an event seems to just defy all rational explanation? Today, we're going to explore the anatomy of a miracle. We're going to look at some incredible firsthand accounts, see what the medical world thinks, and dive into the rigorous demand for proof. Let's get into it. Imagine hearing that. That's a quote from a police officer at a really devastating crash scene. A voice, seemingly from nowhere, just pleading for help. And this single moment, well, it kicks off a story that completely blurs the lines between coincidence and something else. So where do we even begin? I think we have to start with the stories themselves. These are the powerful personal accounts that people hold up as proof that miracles are still happening today. So, to finish the story we just started, picture this. Officers arrive at a car that's overturned in freezing cold water. They all hear a clear voice cry out, "Help me!" But here's the thing. When they finally reach the car, they find the mother had been deceased for hours. The only other person there, her 18-month-old baby, somehow still alive in the back seat. To this day, nobody knows where that voice came from. Okay, here's another incredible account. It's about a teenager, John Smith. He falls through some ice and is underwater for a full 15 minutes. In the ER, after trying everything, the medical staff, they've given up. He has no pulse. His heart has completely stopped. I mean, the situation seems absolutely final. But his mother, she just refuses to accept it. She walks into that room, puts her hands on his feet, and she prays with everything she has. And in that moment, according to everyone who was there, John Smith's heart started beating again. This story is so remarkable, it was actually made into a major movie. Wow, I mean, these stories are incredibly powerful, right? But how does the medical community even begin to process them? Well, let's turn to a fascinating Dutch study that looked into remarkable recoveries after prayer to see what happens when faith and science meet in the examination room. So the researchers set up two really important categories. Medically remarkable basically means a recovery was super surprising, but not technically impossible. Medically unexplained, though, that's a whole different level. That means that based on everything we know about science, there's just no reason for the healing. Having this vocabulary really helps frame the whole conversation. Now, what's really interesting here is the huge disconnect this shows. On one side, you've got the patient. They feel this deep relief and have this absolute certainty that they've been healed by God. But the doctor? Well, their reaction can range from disbelief to even irritation as they start looking for other explanations like, maybe we got the first diagnosis wrong. It's like they're operating in two completely different worlds. And this example just perfectly illustrates that conflict. There is a woman, wheelchair-bound with MS, who suddenly feels completely healed. She even shows up at the doctor's office riding a motorbike, but her MRI scan shows that the physical signs of the disease are all still there. So for her, the proof is that she can live her life again. But for the doctor, the physical data says something else entirely. You can see how this tension naturally leads to some really hard questions. You know, whenever claims of the miraculous pop up, a demand for concrete, verifiable proof is never far behind. And this is really the central challenge you'll hear from skeptics. In a world that runs on the scientific method, the saying goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So the big question is, does that kind of evidence actually exist in a form that the scientific community can accept? So from this perspective, the key is to explore every single possible natural explanation first. You know, you have to ask, was the diagnosis even correct to begin with? Could this just be a case of spontaneous remission? That's a rare thing, but it's documented. A disease just vanishing without treatment. And then there's the big one. Why do these healings always seem to involve things like cancer or internal problems, but you never ever hear about something as clear-cut as a regrown limb? These are tough questions, but they're a necessary part of the conversation. But what's really fascinating is that it's not just skeptics who are demanding proof. One of the most famous Christian healing shrines in the entire world, Lourdes, has its own system for investigating miracle claims that is unbelievably rigorous. So get this, before a case is even looked at, it has to meet these 4 super strict criteria. They're basically designed to rule out any misdiagnosis, to make sure it's not a condition that could have just gotten better on its own, and to confirm the cure couldn't be because of the medical treatment. The cure has to be sudden, total, and completely outside of what medicine would ever expect. And if a case actually meets all those criteria, that's just the beginning of a journey that can take years. First, it gets reviewed by doctors right there at the shrine. Then it's sent to an international medical committee with about 30 specialists from all over the world. Only if that committee agrees the cure is medically inexplicable does the file finally get passed to the church for a theological decision. And the result of this incredibly stringent process? Well, since 1858, over 7,000 cures have been reported at Lourdes. Out of all of those, only 67 have been officially recognized by the church as miraculous. That's less than 1%. It just shows you how incredibly high the bar for proof is, even within a faith institution. But what if focusing on all this physical proof is actually missing another, maybe equally important part of the story? Let's go back to that Dutch study and see what happens to the people themselves, beyond just the physical cure. And this is such a crucial point. Whether a doctor can explain the recovery or not, the experience itself fundamentally changes the person. It's not just about no longer being sick, it's like their whole life story, their sense of who they are, and their spiritual outlook gets a complete reset. This quote from one of the study participants really gets to the heart of it. For them, this experience isn't some kind of medical transaction. They see it as a deeply personal encounter, a moment that heals way more than just the body. It restores their sense of wholeness, their connection to something so much bigger than themselves. And so this is the question we're left with. In the face of a life-altering recovery that transforms a person physically and spiritually, is the most important thing to find a scientific label for it? Or is the real meaning found in the transformation itself? I suppose the answer really depends on where you choose to look. So here's a big question for you. Can the tools of history, the dusty archives, the ancient texts, all of it, can they actually prove that a miracle happened? It's this incredible clash, right? Faith versus the academy. Can a historian, just doing their job as a historian, ever look at the evidence and say, yep, that was supernatural? Let's dig in and see. Okay, so this is the classic roadblock. You've probably heard this before. The standard view, and the biblical scholar John Muir says it perfectly here, is that history just, it doesn't do miracles. The second you say God did it, you're told you've left the history building and wandered into the philosophy or theology departments. For a lot of academics, that's pretty much case closed. But does it have to be? So let's just tackle that idea head on. Is it really impossible for a historian to look at these incredible, extraordinary claims without, breaking the rules of their own profession? Well, some scholars are now arguing, yes, it absolutely is possible. Now check this out, because this comparison is just fascinating. Think about a scientist for a second. They talk all the time about things like quarks or string theory or black holes. Has anyone ever actually seen a quark? Nope. They are unobservable entities that are proposed because they are the best explanation for the evidence we can see. So the scholar Michael Licona asks, why can't historians do the same thing? If all the evidence points to an unobservable cause, like, say, divine action, why is that automatically off the table? And this quote just nails it. This is a brilliant physicist, John Polkinghorne, saying, look, the method is the same. He believes in quarks for the exact same reason he believes in the resurrection, because he's looked at the data, and it's the explanation that makes the most sense. You just follow the evidence where it leads. So how would a historian actually do this in practice? Well, Licona suggests this simple two-step framework. First, you have to show that an event was just wildly improbable, something that, according to the laws of nature as we know them, really shouldn't have happened. And second, you have to notice that it happened in a setting that was already buzzing with religious meaning. A place where people were praying for a miracle or where God was expected to act. When you get both of those things together, you might just be looking at a miracle. All right, so that's the theory. But theory is one thing. Let's get our hands dirty and see how this might actually work with one of the most famous and, frankly, one of the best documented sites of alleged miracles in the entire world, Lourdes, France. Ever since 1858, literally millions of people have made the journey to this grotto. A lot of them were desperately sick, coming for healing. And the amazing thing is, this isn't some foggy, ancient legend. This is a modern phenomenon, and it has a massive, massive paper trail. The medical investigation at Lourdes really got more and more serious over time. They set up a medical bureau way back in the late 1800s. And as you can see from this timeline, there was this period they call the Golden Age, from about 1890 to 1915, where the sheer number of documented cures was just, it was staggering. And to really get why these cures are so significant, you have to understand who was showing up. The historical records, they don't pull any punches. They talk about people who weren't just sick, they were considered completely beyond hope. They were called wrecks, on the brink of death, sometimes literally being carried in things that looked like coffins. And then, something happened. The records used this amazing word, metamorphosis. It was a total transformation. People who were carried in on stretchers were suddenly up and walking. Diseases that doctors had completely given up on just vanished. By all accounts, these changes were dramatic and they were immediate. And we're not talking about vague things like headaches going away. Just listen to some of these cases from that golden age. Marie Lebranchu, cured of advanced TB in her lungs. Cécile Duville de François, whose cure from a severe abdominal TB was instantaneous, and get this, she went on to live to be 105. Or Virginie Hodeberg, cured of kidney TB, and doctors confirmed she was still perfectly healthy 50 years later. I mean, these are incredibly powerful, specific cases from the historical archives, and they are crying out for an explanation. Okay, so with cases as compelling as these, you'd think everyone would be on board, right? You'd expect a consensus, but there isn't one. And that brings us to the next big objection, the problem of consensus. The argument basically goes like this. If the historical method were truly objective, shouldn't every historian who looks at the same evidence come to the same conclusion? And since they don't agree on miracles, doesn't that just prove it's not a real topic for history? Does it mean we should just throw our hands up and say we can't possibly know? Well, hold on. Here's the counter-argument, and it comes from a totally mainstream historian, Richard Evans. He basically says that complete objectivity is a myth. It's an illusion. Every single historian brings their own worldview, their own politics, their own assumptions to their work. It's just an unavoidable part of being human. It's not a flaw in the system, it's just how the system works. And the data actually backs this up. There was a survey that asked American historians what was most important to their identity. And look at the results. The number one answer was ideological commitments at 41%. That's almost 3 times higher than religion. This tells you that a person's fundamental worldview is a huge factor in their historical work, which makes getting a universal agreement on a hot-button topic like miracles, well, it's pretty much impossible. So, the bottom line here is this. History is all about pluralism. It's about different competing interpretations. I mean, historians disagree all the time about what caused the Civil War or the French Revolution. The fact that there isn't a consensus doesn't mean a conclusion is wrong. It just means the topic is complex and it touches on people's deepest core beliefs. Okay, but there's one last really big objection we've got to deal with, and that's, what about all the miracle claims from other religions? This is the classic argument from the philosopher David Hume. You've probably heard this one too. The idea is, if every religion has its own miracle stories, don't they all just cancel each other out? A historian would have to either accept all of them, which seems kind of crazy, or reject all of them to be consistent. But the problem with that argument is that it treats all evidence as if it's created equal, and it's just not. I mean, just look at this chart. The reports we have of Jesus' miracles in the Gospels were written down within decades of the events themselves. Now compare that to the supposed miracles of someone like Apollonius of Tyana. Those were written over a century later, or Hanina Bendosa. We're talking a gap of 150 years. The quality and the timing of the sources are in completely different leagues. And that's really the heart of the matter. A historian's job isn't to just throw all the claims into one big pot and stir. It's to evaluate each claim on its own merits, case by case. You have to weigh the evidence for each report individually. A bunch of poorly sourced claims from centuries later doesn't do anything to invalidate a claim that is well attested and close to the events. So, after all of this, where does that leave us? Well, it really asks us to rethink some of our basic assumptions about what history can and can't do. So let's just quickly recap the big ideas here. First, the argument is that historians can look at a miracle as a potential explanation for the evidence they have. Second, demanding that every single historian agree on it is an unrealistic standard we don't apply to other parts of history. And finally, claims from other religions don't just cancel everything out, they simply need to be put under the same microscope, one by one. Which really brings us to our final question. If a rigorous, honest, historical investigation, one that just follows the evidence wherever it leads, points to an event that looks for all the world like a miracle, is it really unscientific to believe it? Or, just maybe, is it the most reasonable conclusion? That's definitely something to think about. Welcome. Today we're going to dive into a topic that's absolutely fascinating. It's right there at the intersection of faith and science. Modern-day miracles. Are they real? And what happens when we try to put something as profound as faith under a microscope? Let's find out. So, a scientific paper on this very topic opened with this line from the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson. More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of. I think that's the perfect theme for our exploration today, as we look at some truly incredible stories and how they challenge everything we think we know. All right, let's start with a story. This one is so personal, and honestly, from a medical standpoint, it's just baffling. It all happened back in 2015, and it's about a mother, her unborn baby, and a situation that looked completely hopeless. This is Gemma DeGamo, and when she was faced with an absolutely devastating diagnosis for her baby, this is what she said. "As a mother, I was very positive that God who is within me will cure my baby." For her, this wasn't just wishful thinking. She believed her most powerful weapon was prayer. Now, just look at this timeline of events. It's extraordinary. In February 2015, her baby is diagnosed with a fatal condition, hydrops fetalis, no cure. Even her doctor tells her to pray, because that's all that's left. So Gemma and her entire community begin to pray intensely. And then, just a couple of weeks later, an ultrasound shows the baby is completely, totally healed. And then on September 6th, she gives birth to a perfectly healthy baby girl. They named her Angel. Let's just be really clear about what was at stake here. Hydrops fetalis is a fatal condition. We're talking about a massive, life-threatening fluid buildup in the baby's body. The doctor, who represents the very best of medical science, basically had to say, "I can't do anything else. Your only real hope is a miracle." Gemma's story is powerful enough on its own, but what if it's not an isolated event? What if it's part of a much bigger pattern? Well, let's shift gears now to an outreach that happened in Burundi in 2023, where things happen that sound like they're ripped straight from the pages of the Bible. So get this number. In just 2 weeks, over 23,000 people came to faith. That's a staggering number. And you have to ask, what happened? What could possibly fuel that kind of incredible response? Well, according to the people there, it was a series of events that could only describe as modern-day miracles. Let me tell you about a man named Diomed. For 3 long years, he was paralyzed from the waist down. When a team of evangelists told him about the hope of the gospel, he accepted it. But after they left, he felt this urge to call them back and asked them to pray specifically for his healing. And what happened next is just astounding. They prayed, and he stood up, dropped his crutches, and just started walking and shouting for joy. And this didn't happen in a vacuum. Crowd gathered, completely amazed at what they were seeing, and the impact was instant. Right there on the spot, 13 people gave their lives to Christ because they had just seen the impossible happen with their own 2 eyes. And it wasn't just Diomed's story. This pattern just kept repeating. There was a woman named Nadine, an outcast living on a rubbish dump, who was restored to her right mind after hours of prayer. Then there was a feared witch doctor named Baltazar who confronted a prayer team, but he was so overwhelmed by what he called a greater power that he repented and burned all his witchcraft charms. These are stories of radical, instant transformation. Okay, so we have these incredibly powerful personal stories. But how in the world does science even begin to approach claims like these? And that brings us to this really fascinating question. Can you actually, test prayer in a laboratory? Well, to try and find out, scientists use what they call the gold standard of medical research. It's a triple-blind, randomized, controlled trial. And this thing is incredibly rigorous. The patients have no idea if they're being prayed for. The doctors and nurses treating them don't know. Even the people doing the praying don't know who's who. The whole point is to completely eliminate any bias or placebo effect. So, with a method this strict, you'd think we'd get a nice, clear answer, right? Yes or no? Well, that's where things get really, really complicated. When science tries to measure the divine, it walks into what one paper called a scientific and religious minefield. When you actually look at the results from these top-tier, triple-blind studies, the data is just wild. It's totally contradictory. For example, one 2001 study found that distant prayer nearly doubled the pregnancy rate in women going through IVF. Doubled. But then another study from the very same year found that prayer had 0 effect on heart patients. And then, to make it even crazier, a huge 2006 study found that patients who knew they were being prayed for actually had a higher rate of complications. the data is all over the place. So when science is faced with results that look miraculous, it has a kind of toolkit of conventional explanations. You got the placebo response, right? Where just believing you're being treated can make you better. There's spontaneous remission, where an illness just goes away for no reason we can find. You also have statistical ideas like regression to the mean. And then there are these observer effects like the Hawthorne effect, where people change their behavior just because they know they're being watched. But here's where this gets really interesting. The scientists themselves started to wonder if their own methods were the problem, not scientifically flawed, but theologically flawed. They started asking questions that you just can't answer in a lab. For instance, the researchers actually asked this. They said, if we have to control variables like how many people are praying or for how long, what does that imply about God? Does God only answer people who are, and this is their word, sufficiently bothersome? It's an unsettling thought, isn't it? And they kept going down this path. They asked, what if the type of prayer is important? If one set of words works better than another, are we basically saying God is like a bureaucrat who only considers petitions if they're filled out on the right form? You can start to see how the scientific method creates a really strange, mechanical picture of the divine. And here's one more question they raised. If adding things like vows or sacrifices makes a prayer more likely to be answered, what does that say? Is God someone who can be flattered or even bribed into doing something? These questions, coming from scientists, really get to the heart of the problem here. It's a fundamental mismatch. So all of this leads to a pretty profound realization. The fact that science can't get a clear, repeatable, measurable signal on prayer doesn't automatically mean prayer doesn't work. It might just mean that faith and formulas are speaking two completely different languages. And that brings us to the study's own stunning conclusion. The authors themselves wrote that for both theological and scientific reasons, their best method, that gold standard trial, it just can't be properly applied to studying prayer. The tool isn't right for the job. And the main takeaway, the big headline, it doesn't come from a pastor or a theologian. It comes directly from the scientists. Their paper ends with this simple, powerful statement. Religion is based on faith and not on proof. Science demands proof. Faith, by its very nature, asks us to step beyond it. And that really leaves us with this final thought to wrestle with. We've heard these incredible, life-changing stories, and we've seen science's best, most honest attempt to measure them fall short. So what if miracles were never meant to be repeatable data points in an experiment? What if instead, they are deeply personal invitations for you and for me to believe?